Welcome to another Crafting with Roswell. Today I'm going to be taking you through the steps to make a gnome garland. It's pretty amazing what we can do with a piece of cardboard with a little slit cut up the middle and some yarn to create our own little gnome. So let's get started. In your kit, you will receive a bundle of yarn, and when you separate it, you'll notice across the center it's tied closed with a section of string. If you gently pull that off and set that aside, this is 2 lengths. You should then have 5 bundles inside. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And these all measure 3.5 Amanda arm lengths. Sorry, I'm not more specific than that. I'm about 5'6" in height. To give you an idea, these are about like 18 feet long per section. So you need a lot of yarn in order to make one pom-pom. So one pom-pom is one section of 3.5 Amanda arm lengths. You have your twine that will act as your hanger for your gnomes. You can always hang them from something else instead. You will have 5 wooden beads that want to roll out at you. Or stay in your bag or roll onto the floor. So you'll want to keep all of those together. They will act as the nose of your gnome. You'll have your postcard, your pre-cut template, your needs-to-be-cut template to make the hat for the gnome, and you'll have 2 strips of felt, which will be used to make the hats. So, put some of these supplies over here, since I've duplicated them. These are the ones that I've been using to make my sample, so I will just use those now. All right. So, we also need a hot glue gun, a pen or a permanent marker, and scissors. Suggested extras would be if you want felt in additional colors. I have a friend who's partial to purple, so I'm using purple for hers. You can add mini pom-poms to the top of the hats if you would like. You can also secure them differently than I have. I just used a little piece of yarn hot glued to the back to add them to my twine. I recommend Scotch tape or mailing tape to help fortify your cardboard. This is kind of flimsy. I really wish I had like a harder hardboard surface to use for these, but cardboard works in a pinch. I just taped over mine to help make it a little sturdier. And then the next is if you want yarn additional colors. Your kits come with white yarn, but you can always use different colors for your gnomes. All right, so let's get started. So first up, I have already cut out my gnome hat template. I'm going to set that aside with my felt. I'm going to start by making my pom-pom. Now, if you happen to have a pom-pom maker, by all means, use one of these instead. I just unfortunately do not have the budget to give everyone one of these or to even have one for everyone in a craft program. So these are helpful for making pom-poms, but we're going to get the same effect using this piece of cardboard. So let's dive into that. So here's one section of my 3.5 Amanda arm lengths strings here. Just going to kind of undo it, make sure there's no real knots. That way when I'm going to wind it on my cardboard, I don't have to worry about that step then. I know that all of my knots are already out. Here's my end. The first thing I'm going to do is just cut a few inches off. And I'm going to go ahead and loop this through the cardboard notch here. If you want it to be really out of the way, you can do a little piece of tape on it. But once you're starting to wrap, you can just hold your fingers on this, and then that'll help keep it out of the way. So with this here, it's eventually going to tie off the middle of our pom-pom wrappings to create our first knot to cinch our yarn together. So I'm going to hold my string in my hands, hold my yarn in the middle of my cardboard template, and I'm just going to gently wrap. And you want to gently wrap. You don't want to wrap tightly. The more pressure you put on your cardboard template, the less likely it's going to last through all 5 of your pom-poms. The other thing to be aware of is that if you're wrapping too tightly, you're going to see this opening closing in between. So we want a nice loose wrapping around and around. And the way I've measured out the yarn is so that we don't have to count how many times we're wrapping. All of our strips are about the same size. Therefore, we're not dealing with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 countings for all of our pom-poms to end up about the same size. And you can see this is closing a little bit just from the weight of the yarn being wrapped around, even though I'm wrapping loosely. That's not a big deal. The big concern is that we can still pull our yarn through to tie off our middle. Don't worry about any loose ends at this point. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and take this string, pull my other end up through, and I'm just going to pull tightly and do a quick knot. This knot doesn't have to be super tight. If you pull too tight, you can break your yarn. So I'm just going to do a quick double knot. Just to start holding these together. And then I'm going to go ahead and take off a few inches of my yarn that I had set aside that wrapped my 5 sections together. That's going to help us tie this closed as well. So I just cut off a few inches to double over, and I am going to feed that through this slot as well. So just tucking it through, and then I'm going to double knot these ends. This is going to allow me, having this doubled, pull even tighter to cinch the middle of my pom-pom without having my yarn break. So I'm going to go ahead and double knot that. And don't worry, this is all completely hidden once we start cutting open our pom-pom. So right now, I already know that this is going to be hanging over, so I'm just going to give it a little trim. Same thing over here. I'm going to cut open that loop and just give these a little trim. Sharp scissors are key for this project. If you have a dull pair of scissors, you might want to invest in a sharper pair. Next up is slicing open our pom-pom. So on each end, we have all of these wrapped sections. We're just going to cut through them. So don't feel like you have to cut through all of them. You can just start cutting your way across, and then you're exposing lower layers, and go ahead and give those a trim once you see them. And so we're cutting through all of these wrappings. So you're just kind of sliding in your scissors and doing little snips. And we're going to do the same thing on both sides. So just be patient, keep working your way across, snipping, snipping, snipping. And being mindful of your cardboard template, we don't want to mangle this in order for us to have it ready to use to make 4 more of these in order to do our 5 gnomes on our garland. So there's one side cut. I'm going to go ahead and cut the other side. Just a few more to trim. And there we go. So now essentially my pom-pom is free from my template. And you're just going to have to give it a little scrunching. Just kind of mush it all together. You might find a few ends that are a little longer than others. You can always just come through with your scissors and give them little trims. With your pom-pom, you'll notice the width of my template is essentially the width of my pom-pom. So if you want to make your own pom-pom template guide using cardboard, essentially the width that you make this section up and down is essentially going to be the width of your pom-pom once you're finished making it. So let's go ahead and make our hat. So I have my piece of felt. Just move my card out of the way. And all I'm going to do is kind of go as closely to where I already cut to get as many hats as I can out of my felt. Your kit should have plenty for you to make 5. I'm just going to go ahead and do a light tracing. You can always just hold the template against the felt and cut that way. I decided to trace. So I'm just going to cut out my hat. And I recommend doing a practice fold. Folding in at the top can be very tight. And it's also difficult to know where to place your glue. So essentially, if we glue on this side, right here, that's our opening. So it might make you want to glue on the inside, but if you glue on the outer edge, then when we wrap it, the glue will hold it closed. So I'm going to go ahead and put a little glue here. And remember, if you are using hot glue, I would wait just a second before you press it closed to not have your fingers right in the super hot glue. You can start at the bottom and just gently overlap. And this is essentially the trickiest part, is getting your hat to close with the hot glue on. And now that my hot glue is dried a little bit, it's not burning my fingers by having any on there. And now my hat is closed. And then any pieces that are kind of loose, you can pull away. And your cone might not be perfect, but you can just take your scissors and give it a little trim. And there is our hat. I'll get the rest of the glue off my finger. All right, so now I have my hat. Now I have my pom-pom. And now it's deciding where I want to place the hat on my pom-pom. And so after you place the hat, you can always go around and trim up your pom-pom further. But all I like to do is take a little bead of hot glue around the inner hat edge and just set this on my yarn where I want it to be, and the yarn will naturally push itself up into the hat. So there is first part of my gnome. And the way this hangs, that little bit of glue is enough to support the weight of the yarn and the little wood ball inside your cap. If you find it needs a little reinforcing, you can always add a little more glue in the back side that's not visible. So when I made mine, I used a little yarn to make the loop. So I'm going to do that same thing again. So that extra piece of yarn that was used as my wrapping, I'm just going to go ahead and cut a little piece off. And on the back side where my gnome hat is closing, I'm going to go ahead and fold this over and add a little glue. Let that dry for a second, and then add on my little loop. And then I want to make sure my loop doesn't get glued down. So I'm just going to make sure it can lift up a little bit. And then add a little more glue across the top of those two ends. And then just let that dry. And then you'll be able to slip your twine through. Once you have your hanger on, once you have your twine through, I recommend at that point deciding where you would like to add your gnome nose. So for my first round of gnomes, the way I hung this on the twine, my nose is kind of sideways. So you have a little give in terms of what's the front and what's the back. And your gnome might be looking sideways. But I'm just going to go ahead, making sure the two holes are on each side. Place a dollop of hot glue in the middle. Add on my nose with the little holes for the wood bead on each side. Kind of push my yarn around it. And let that dry. And then I'm just going to use my scissors to trim some of the face away so that the nose shows out a little more. Peel away those fuzzies. And there is my little gnome. So then I would just, oops, my hot glue isn't completely dry on the back yet. Once that glue is dry, I would then just push my twine through my yarn loop, hang it from my garland, and onto my next gnome. Your kit has enough for you to make 5 gnomes. I hope you enjoy this project. Get creative, use different yarn colors, use different felts, and really make it your own. I'll be back again next week with a photo transfer magnet project.